As a young boy, I had a dream that was so far-fetched as probably being an astronaut. And that dream was to be a photographer, to be a filmmaker, because I was drawn by the visual image. I mean, magazines by National Geographic, I mean, who hasn't been influenced by them? And when I saw those old issues of National Geographic, I mean, I just was drawn to those pictures of animals. And I just wanted to be one of those people that went out there and take pictures. But, you know, of course, growing up in India, I had no idea where to begin. And the title of a filmmaker and photographer was really far-fetched. But like I said, in the end, whether you're doing filmmaking or photography, it's about telling a story. And I decided today that I wasn't going to bombard you with any more beautiful pictures, because around every corner in National Geographic, you're seeing amazing images. So why bombard you with more of them? But then that was the problem. I couldn't get past this slide. But I realized that I'm not the only one handicapped with this problem. Recently, I was photographing a tribe on the border of Burma, the Naga tribe. And these are, you know, they were known as headhunters, and they live in a pretty remote part of India, and very few people have been to these places. And I realized that they too couldn't tell a story without images. And here you see, in the background is a huge panel of wood, probably the size of this screen, and on that are carved these incredible images of a pangolin in the center, an elephant on the side, what looks like a wild dog, a gibbon, a skull, and the story of humankind. Of course, people back then didn't have fancy cameras, so they used carvings to depict stories, to tell their stories, because that's how you can capture imagination. And that's how you can fascinate people, and that's how they can tell the stories to their children as they sit in what's called the morong, the dorm, where they tell stories around a campfire. Hundreds of miles away, up in the Himalaya, the Buddhist monks drew beautiful paintings on the walls of these monasteries to fascinate you, to capture the audience, to capture the imagination. Of course, a raptor carrying a snake away, not very different from what I attempt to do today with my photography. Of course, my pictures aren't as beautiful as what you just saw earlier, but I can't paint. And photography is in many ways more challenging, and in many ways it conveys that same message of what the painting's trying to do. So, seeing all of this, I realized that even 100 years ago, people were using the tool of paintings, of art, sculpture, to document biodiversity and to tell the story of life around them through images. Because at the end of the day, what we've all got to realize is that these images transcend boundaries of language, culture, and all these things that are difficult to get your message across. And images just go across all those boundaries. Because what we are, at the end of the day, we are very visual animals. We're primates. And to that end, we're very visual. We use our eyes to see things. It's probably one of our most acutely developed sense, that of sight. And I was influenced, like I said, by magazines like National Geographic. And if you can imagine the power of one image having such an impact, can you imagine the power of a moving image? And when my father brought back documentaries like Trials of Life by Sir David Attenborough, I used to replay those tapes over and over again until they were worn out, because that was a world I had never seen before, and what I was seeing on screen just absorbed me fully. And my father, seeing my interest in all of this, and him being an amateur photographer himself, decided to give me his 25-year-old Nikkor Mat stills camera while I was about 14 years old. Camera was far more experienced, of course, with no light meter, no autofocus. Of course, wasn't digital. We used to use these things called film back then, if some of you remember. And what happened was that my world was transformed. I had suddenly found a tool, a little magic box where I could go out there, photograph things around me, and take them home. And that was how photography started. It started as a documentation tool because I could take these pictures and then try to get them identified. But the consequence of that was that my academics took a nosedive. So my father very quickly confiscated the camera from me and sent me across the oceans to a place called Brownsville, Texas. Shows up on the weather map when the hurricanes come up in the Gulf of Mexico, to go study hotel management. Like any good Indian. If it wasn't hotel management, they would have probably sent me to study to be an engineer or a doctor. But the best part about it was that it allowed me the freedom to be away from the family, but I had to work 3 jobs to earn my first camera. So I became a staff photographer at the college newspaper, so that brought in a little bit of journalism into my photography. I started working as a lab assistant and also as a receptionist at the local wildlife sanctuary on weekends. And I earned the first camera, and I set off to explore Mexico in the cloud forest. And that was one of the most incredible experiences where I met this person, John Bax, a Belgian filmmaker he made documentaries for Discovery and Animal Planet, and he was fantastic with capturing birds. That was his specialty. And I convinced him that we have a forest in India, the Western Ghats, a mountain range similar to this cloud forest, which has an even more incredible amount of biodiversity, and why not he come to India and I be his apprentice? And he said yes, and being an apprentice was the best thing that could have happened to me at that point, because I didn't want to be in college anymore. So we decided, we planned this whole expedition, and I was going to be the one carrying his tripod and taking him to all of my special places in the mountains. And a week before the trip, John calls me up and he says, Sandesh, I don't think I can make this trip. I'm like, why? What happened? I think I'm too old to go to India. I was his wife Alice telling him that. So I was shattered. That was the end of my dream. But my director called me to his office and he said, Sandesh, do you still want to make this documentary? And I said, yes. And he invested a huge amount of money, about $10,000, and bought me my first video camera. I had never known head or tail which way to use, but I went back to India. The instruction manual of the camera was my reading material for the flight back. And I did this documentary. It was supposed to be a 3-month summer college film project. But much to my parents' dismay, I dropped out of college, and it turned into a 3-year affair because I couldn't watch the first 3 months of my footage. And we made a documentary called Sahyadri's Mountains of the Monsoon. Luckily, the documentary garnered a few awards. And then later on, a person who saw the film said that, wow, we need to now convert this into a book. And then we went about and we created a book, a coffee table book about the Western Ghats, and put in a lot of science. There had been a lot of research that had been done in this mountain range. We combined science, we combined art, and we put this together in a beautiful book which is popular as well as scientific for policymakers and decision makers to think about the Western Ghats. And in the end, what happened was that most recently, the book and the documentary were used to declare the Western Ghats as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that was the most incredible thing. And I was very encouraged by what happened, because you were able to combine all these different elements and bring about something that could make a difference. And encouraged by that, most recently we went into the Himalaya and completed another book project, Mountains of Life. But it's not easy going out there and taking pictures. And I thought I'd put together a short clip of what it feels like to actually be out there, to go out, take these pictures, and to bring it to all of you. So here's a short clip from that.
Jungle crows continue where the tiger left off. Bronze-winged jacanas go about their daily business. A pied kingfisher feeds on little fish. I sit and wait. 6 days sitting in the hide, and all I've had is one brief glimpse of the tiger. Reviewing the footage, I see that he's not very happy with the camera traps being there. He snarls at one of them before disappearing. I decide it's time to remove all the camera traps.
Being a wildlife filmmaker or photographer, it's a very, very boring and frustrating job. It's not easy sitting there for hours on end trying to get an image, and even after 6 days of sitting there, I wasn't quite able to get the image I wanted, although I got a beautiful sequence of the whole thing. And my camera trap technology captured this image of new animal behavior, tiger feeding on a rhino carcass, for example. And one thing I need to mention is that the advent of digital technology has allowed us to explore, push the boundaries, and tell stories in different ways. Earlier to this, you had to have a video camera and a still camera, but now you can do both with one contraption. And that's the beauty of being able to harness all of this new technology to tell your stories. And I like to not just documenting new behavior, new technology, I also like to go after new species. Most recently, we did an expedition to a remote part of northeastern India where we found this little guy, a lizard without a name, a new species. Of course, new species in that region are not very new. There's been over 353 new species over the last decade discovered and described already in that part of India. So I love going to places where you know that there are more new species to be found, to document them and put them together in a way that connects the outside world to the natural world and just brings these two things together. And it's, like I said earlier, it's not just about taking great, pretty pictures, but it's also about spending the time, packaging it all, combining the story of the natural world with the cultural world, and putting it together in a way that connects you with people. And that's what I do as a wildlife filmmaker and photographer. And a long time ago, while watching television, another factor that had a great influence in my life, I read a quote that many of you here may have heard, that in the end, we will conserve only what we love only what we understand, and we understand only what we are taught. And to that end, we put together an app also, because now I realize television isn't doing what it used to. So we need to be innovative in our storytelling to get that message out to a larger audience. And with this, what we've been able to do is combine different elements of filmmaking, photography, and tell a story. And as storytellers, we need to keep exploring these boundaries and harness modern technology and tell stories in different ways. Thank you.